Ma'am, step away from the pump right now. I'm just paying for gas, officer. Is there a problem? You match a description. Step away and put your hands where I can see them. What description? I need you to comply immediately, or you're going to jail tonight. You're making a serious mistake. I'm a federal officer. I don't care what you claim to be. Turn around and put your hands on the car. The gas station security camera caught all 31 seconds of it in crystal clear resolution, time-stamped, unbroken, undeniable. And Officer Ryan Duffield had absolutely no idea that the woman he was about to force into handcuffs carried a badge that outranked his own department. A badge backed by the full authority of the United States federal court system. She wasn't a suspect. She wasn't a threat. She was Deputy United States Marshal Angela Whitfield, and in less than 4 minutes, she was going to teach him exactly what happens when local police assume they have jurisdiction over federal law enforcement, based on nothing but the color of someone's skin. Before we go further into this one, I need something from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. City, state, or country, doesn't matter. And if stories about accountability and people who refuse to back down matter to you, hit that subscribe button, because this one gets more intense with every minute. Trust me, you don't want to look away from this. Angela Whitfield was 39 years old and had spent the last 12 years of her life inside the United States Marshal's Service, the oldest federal law enforcement agency in the country. She wasn't a beat cop. She wasn't a patrol officer working traffic stops and noise complaints. Deputy marshals handled fugitive apprehension, federal prisoner transport, witness protection, courthouse security for federal judges, and high-risk warrant service against people the FBI and local police departments had already given up on finding. Angela had been part of task forces that took down cartel enforcers hiding in suburban rental homes. She had transported some of the most dangerous federal inmates in the country between courthouses without a single incident. She had personal letters of commendation from 2 different federal judges for her professionalism under pressure. She was calm by training and by temperament. 12 years chasing fugitives who had every reason to run, to fight, to do anything to avoid capture, had taught her that panic accomplished nothing. Composure was a weapon, and Angela wielded it better than almost anyone in her division. Her supervisor, a 26-year veteran named Chief Deputy Marshal Robert Alvarez, once told a room full of new recruits that Angela Whitfield was the calmest person he had ever watched get shot at. That wasn't hyperbole. She had been shot at twice in her career, both times during fugitive apprehensions that went sideways, and both times she had walked away having done her job by the book. That Thursday evening, Angela wasn't chasing a fugitive. She was driving home from the federal courthouse in downtown Columbus, Ohio, after a 14-hour day that had included testifying in a federal trial and then escorting 2 prisoners back to a detention facility for transport processing. She was exhausted, in the specific way that comes from sustained vigilance rather than physical labor, the kind of tired where your body is fine, but your mind feels wrung out. Her personal vehicle, a gray Honda Accord with nothing to distinguish it as belonging to a federal officer, was running low on gas, and she pulled into a station off Route 40 to fill up, before heading home to her 2 kids and a husband who had dinner waiting. She was dressed in business casual, dark slacks and a blazer over a simple blouse, the kind of clothing that let her move through a federal courthouse without drawing attention. Her service weapon, a department-issued Glock, was secured in a holster at her hip, mostly concealed beneath her blazer. Her badge and credentials were in her jacket pocket. She had just finished a full day representing the United States government in a courtroom, and now she was standing at a gas pump like millions of other Americans, swiping her card, watching the numbers tick upward, thinking about what she was going to make for dinner. Nothing about the scene was unusual. Nothing about her behavior suggested anything, except a tired professional finishing her day. But 40 feet away, in the parking lot of the adjoining convenience store, Officer Ryan Duffield of the local police department was running through a radio dispatch in his head that would set the next 4 minutes into motion, and would end with him losing everything. Ryan Duffield was 31 years old and had been with the department for 6 years. He wasn't new, but he wasn't seasoned either. He occupied that dangerous middle ground in law enforcement, where an officer has enough experience to feel confident, but not enough judgment to slow down, when confidence should have given way to caution. His personnel file, which would later become public record through a Freedom of Information request, showed a pattern that supervisors had noted but never meaningfully addressed. 4 prior complaints in 6 years, 3 of them involving allegations that Duffield had escalated routine encounters with black residents, faster and more aggressively than similar encounters with white residents. None of the complaints had been sustained. All of them had been closed with vague notes about insufficient evidence. 10 minutes before Angela pulled into that gas station, dispatch had put out a call about a robbery at a convenience store 2 miles away. The suspect description was thin, deliberately so, because the store clerk had been panicked and talking fast to a 911 operator, trying to get details out of him. Black female, medium height, dark clothing, possibly armed, left on foot or in a dark-colored sedan. That was the entirety of the description. No further details. No specific clothing beyond dark colors, no hair description, no age range, just enough vague characteristics to fit an enormous percentage of women in the greater Columbus area. Duffield had been patrolling nearby when the call came through, and he had immediately started scanning for anyone who might match. When he pulled into the gas station lot and saw Angela Whitfield standing at the pump, dark slacks, dark blazer, a black woman of medium height standing next to a dark-colored sedan, his mind did something that minds trained on bias tend to do. It stopped gathering information and started confirming a conclusion it had already reached. He didn't see a tired federal officer finishing a long day. He saw a robbery suspect who happened to be standing exactly where he expected to find one. Have you ever been mistaken for someone you weren't just because of how you looked? Drop a yes or no in the comments below, because what happens next is going to make you furious. Duffield parked his patrol car at an angle that blocked Angela's Accord from pulling away from the pump, a tactical positioning choice that told her everything about his intentions before he even opened his car door. He approached with his hand resting on his service weapon, not drawn, but positioned in a way that signaled readiness. Angela noticed him immediately. 12 years of federal law enforcement work meant she noticed everyone who approached her, always, without exception, whether she was on duty or not. Situational awareness wasn't a skill she turned off when she clocked out. "Ma'am, step away from the pump right now," Duffield said, his voice carrying the particular flatness that officers use when they've already decided how an encounter is going to go. Angela looked at him, gauged the tension in his posture, and kept her own hands visible and relaxed at her sides. "I'm just paying for gas, officer," she said. "Is there a problem?" "You match a description," Duffield said. "Step away and put your hands where I can see them." "What description?" Angela asked, and her voice was even, professional, the same tone she used when questioning witnesses in federal depositions. "I need you to comply immediately," Duffield said, ignoring the question entirely, "or you're going to jail tonight." This is where most civilians make a critical decision, and it's usually the wrong one out of panic or fear. Angela made a different decision, but not out of fear. She made it out of procedure. She knew, better than almost anyone standing in that parking lot could know, exactly what her rights were and exactly how this interaction was supposed to unfold under the law. But she also knew something else, something that Duffield had no idea about yet. She knew that arguing with an armed, anxious officer in a public parking lot while he was mid-escalation was tactically unwise, regardless of who held more legal authority. So she chose to identify herself clearly and immediately, the way any trained federal officer would when detained by another jurisdiction. "You're making a serious mistake," she said. "I'm a federal officer." Duffield's expression didn't change, and this is the moment that would be replayed on national news programs for weeks afterward. "I don't care what you claim to be," he said. "Turn around and put your hands on the car." What Duffield had just done, in the span of about 90 seconds, was ignore a direct verbal identification from a federal law enforcement officer, an identification that any properly trained police officer is required to take seriously enough to verify before proceeding with physical detention. He had also, critically, not asked to see identification. He had not asked her to slowly produce credentials. He had simply dismissed the claim outright and moved directly toward physical force, which is precisely the moment where this stop transformed from a mistaken identity situation into a potential federal civil rights violation. The convenience store clerk, a 19-year-old college student named Marissa Cho, had walked outside on a smoke break and was standing near the store entrance when the confrontation began. She had her phone in her hand and, sensing something was wrong, started recording. Her footage, shaky but clear enough, would later become one of the most viewed pieces of evidence in the entire case. Should officers be legally required to verify a claimed federal identity before making physical contact during a detention? Let me know what you think in the comments. Angela made her decision in a fraction of a second. She had two paths. She could resist verbally, assert her rights more forcefully, and risk the encounter escalating into physical force against a federal officer who had every legal right to be treated with the deference her position demanded. Or she could comply, document everything mentally with the same precision she used on the job, and let the consequences unfold through the proper channels afterward. She chose compliance, but not silent compliance. Every word out of her mouth from that point forward was designed to build a record. "Officer, I am complying," she said, turning slowly, her hands rising to the roof of her car. "I want you to know that my credentials are in my jacket's inside left pocket. I am a Deputy United States Marshal, and I am telling you this clearly before you make contact with me." Duffield grabbed her left wrist and pulled it behind her back. The move was rougher than the situation called for, rougher than department training protocols would have permitted for a compliant, unresisting detainee. He pulled her other wrist back, and the handcuffs clicked shut, tight enough that Angela would have visible red marks on both wrists for the rest of the night. "You're under arrest," Duffield said. "For what?" Angela asked, her voice still steady, despite the metal biting into her skin, matching a robbery suspect description and resisting a lawful detention. "I did not resist," Angela said. "I complied with every instruction you gave me, and I told you I am a federal officer. My credentials are in my jacket. You need to check them before this goes any further." Marissa Cho, still recording from near the store entrance, called out, "She's not resisting. I've got this on video. She's been standing completely still." Duffield glanced toward her, but didn't respond. He turned Angela toward his patrol car, one hand gripping her cuffed wrists, the other on her shoulder, guiding her forward with more force than the situation required. This is the part of the story that separates it from an ordinary case of mistaken identity. Because at this exact moment, Duffield had every opportunity to stop, to verify, to check the credentials Angela kept telling him were sitting in her jacket pocket less than a foot from his hand. Instead, he made a decision that would define the rest of his career and cost the city of Columbus millions of dollars. He decided that backing down now, after already handcuffing her in front of witnesses, would look weak, so he doubled down instead. He placed her in the back of his patrol car. The seat was hard plastic, the kind designed for easy cleaning rather than comfort, and Angela sat with her hands cuffed uncomfortably behind her, feeling the metal dig deeper with every small movement the car made. Duffield got into the driver's seat and picked up his radio to call in the arrest. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. I have one in custody matching the description from the earlier robbery call at the Route 40 station. Suspect is uncooperative, claims to be a federal officer." The dispatcher's response came back within seconds, and it was the first crack in the wall Duffield had built around his own certainty. "Unit 14, can you confirm identification on the suspect?" Duffield hesitated. "Negative," he said. "Suspect refused to allow me access to identification during the detention." That statement would later become one of the most damaging pieces of evidence in the entire case, because it was demonstrably false. Angela had told him, twice, exactly where her identification was located. She had never refused access. She had specifically directed him to it. Duffield's own body-worn camera, which had been running the entire time, would capture every word of that exchange with perfect clarity, directly contradicting what he had just told dispatch. Do you think an officer lying to dispatch about a suspect's cooperation should be treated as a separate criminal offense? Drop your answer below, because it's about to get a whole lot worse for Officer Duffield. The drive to the precinct took 9 minutes. Angela sat in silence, working through the situation with the same analytical clarity she applied to fugitive apprehension cases. She knew her department would need to be notified immediately. She knew there would be a body-worn camera recording that contradicted whatever report Duffield intended to file. She knew Marissa Cho's cell phone footage existed and needed to be preserved before it could conveniently disappear. She was building a case in her head before she had even been booked. When they arrived at the station, Duffield walked her inside, still handcuffed, past a front desk sergeant who looked up with mild curiosity that would soon turn into something far more serious. The sergeant, a 22-year veteran named Patricia Kowalski, had processed thousands of arrests in her career and had developed an instinct for when something didn't sit right. "What do we have, Duffield?" she asked. "Robbery suspect. Matches the description from the Route 40 call. Claims she's a federal marshal." Kowalski's expression shifted immediately. "Claims she's a what?" she asked. "A federal marshal," Duffield repeated, and for the first time his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Did you verify that?" Kowalski asked. Duffield didn't answer right away, and that silence told Kowalski everything she needed to know about how this arrest had actually gone down. Angela spoke up, her voice calm and controlled, despite the metal cutting into her wrists for the better part of 10 minutes now. "Sergeant, my name is Angela Whitfield. I am a Deputy United States Marshal, assigned to the Southern District of Ohio. My credentials and badge are in the inside left pocket of my jacket. I told Officer Duffield exactly where they were located before he handcuffed me, and he never checked. I need you to verify my identity immediately, and I need my supervisor notified." Kowalski walked directly to Angela and reached into the jacket pocket herself. She pulled out a leather credential case, opened it, and found exactly what Angela had described: a gold badge, a federal identification card with Angela's photograph, her name, her title, and the official seal of the United States Marshal Service. Kowalski had seen fake credentials before during her career, cheap replicas that criminals sometimes carried to impersonate law enforcement, and she knew within 2 seconds of looking at this one that it wasn't a fake. The weight, the printing quality, the security features embedded in the card, all of it screamed authenticity. "Duffield," Kowalski said, her voice dropping into a register that made several nearby officers stop what they were doing and look over. "These are real! Get these cuffs off her right now!" The cuffs came off. Angela rubbed her wrists, where deep red indentations were already visible, evidence that would be photographed within the hour as part of what was rapidly becoming an entirely different kind of investigation than anyone had anticipated at the start of the shift. Kowalski immediately picked up a phone and called the number listed on the federal credential to verify it directly with the Marshal's Service Duty Office. The confirmation came back in under 2 minutes. Deputy United States Marshal Angela Whitfield, active duty, 12 years of federal service, no disciplinary history, currently assigned to fugitive apprehension and courthouse security. A lieutenant arrived within minutes, a 20-year veteran named David Okafor, who had handled plenty of difficult situations over the course of his career, but had never encountered anything quite like arresting a federal officer without cause. Someone briefed him rapidly. He listened, his expression growing darker with every sentence, and then he turned to Angela. "Marshal Whitfield, on behalf of this department, I sincerely apologize. This should never have happened." Angela nodded but said very little, because she understood, with the same instinct that had made her successful for 12 years, that every word she spoke from this point forward mattered and needed to be measured carefully. Okafor turned to Duffield. "Badge and weapon," he said. "You're on administrative leave effective immediately, pending a full investigation." "Lieutenant, I responded to a call," Duffield started. "You arrested and handcuffed a federal marshal after she told you exactly where her credentials were located," Okafor said, cutting him off. "You then falsely told dispatch that she refused to provide identification. Your body camera is going to tell a very different story than whatever you're about to say right now. Hand over your badge and weapon." Duffield complied slowly, his hands visibly shaking, the reality of what he had done finally beginning to register on his face. Angela was released, offered a ride home in a supervisor's vehicle, which she declined, choosing instead to call her own husband to come pick her up. Before she left the station, she made 3 phone calls of her own. The first went to Chief Deputy Marshal Robert Alvarez, her direct supervisor, informing him of the entire incident in precise, methodical detail. The second went to the United States Marshal's Service Office of Professional Responsibility, The third went to a civil rights attorney she had worked alongside on prior federal task force cases, someone she trusted to understand exactly what had happened and exactly what needed to happen next. By the following morning, the incident had reached the highest levels of both the local police department and the regional office of the United States Marshal's Service. Federal officers do not get arrested by local police without serious institutional consequences rippling outward almost immediately, because the entire structure of federal versus local law enforcement jurisdiction depends on a baseline level of mutual recognition and respect. When that baseline gets violated this dramatically, and this publicly, agencies do not simply let it fade quietly. The Marshal's Service issued a formal statement within 24 hours, condemning the arrest and confirming that Deputy Marshal Whitfield had been acting entirely within her rights and had committed no violation of any kind. The statement noted, pointedly, that her clear and repeated identification as a federal officer had been ignored and that the matter had been referred for full review. Marissa Cho's cell phone video, meanwhile, had already found its way onto social media, posted by a friend she had shown it to that same night. Within hours, it had accumulated hundreds of thousands of views. Within 2 days, it had crossed several million. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets, then national cable news networks ran segments analyzing the body-worn camera footage frame by frame, comparing Duffield's radio statement to dispatch against what the footage actually showed him being told, side by side, with the discrepancy highlighted in red boxes on screen. The headline that spread across every platform read some version of the same phrase: "Cop handcuffs federal marshal at gas station, lied to dispatch about her cooperation." The commentary underneath ranged from outrage to disbelief, with legal analysts breaking down exactly which statutes Duffield had potentially violated, and civil rights organizations pointing to it as yet another example of a systemic pattern that extended far beyond one officer having one bad night. What do you think should happen to an officer who not only makes a wrongful arrest, but then actively lies about it to cover himself afterward? Drop your thoughts, because the consequences that followed were more severe than almost anyone expected. The department opened a formal internal affairs investigation the same week. Investigators pulled every piece of available evidence, the gas station's own security footage from multiple angles, Duffield's full body-worn camera recording from the moment he stepped out of his patrol car, Marissa Cho's cell phone video, and the radio transmission logs from dispatch. When laid side by side, chronologically, the footage told an unambiguous story that left no room for interpretation or defense. The body camera audio captured Angela's calm, repeated identification of herself as a federal officer, and captured her specifically telling Duffield where his credentials were located, twice, before he ever applied the handcuffs. It captured his radio call to dispatch, made less than 90 seconds later, falsely claiming she had refused to provide identification. The contradiction was so stark, so immediate, and so easily verifiable that investigators later described it as one of the clearest cases of officer dishonesty they had encountered in years of internal reviews. The investigation also uncovered something else, something that made the situation exponentially worse for both Duffield and the department that had employed him. Investigators pulled his complete personnel file and found the 4 prior complaints that had never been sustained, 3 of which involved strikingly similar patterns. Rapid escalation with black residents during otherwise routine encounters, a tendency toward physical force before verbal de-escalation had been meaningfully attempted, and consistently vague, defensive incident reports that conflicted with witness statements. None of those complaints had triggered any additional training, any closer supervision, or any pattern of conduct review. They had simply been filed, closed, and forgotten. The Department of Justice took notice within weeks. Because the victim in this case was a federal law enforcement officer, and because the incident had generated such extensive national media coverage, the case moved through review channels far faster than most civil rights complaints typically do. Federal prosecutors began examining whether Duffield's conduct constituted a deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal charge that carries significant prison time when an officer is found to have knowingly violated someone's constitutional rights while acting under the authority of his badge. Officer Ryan Duffield was formally terminated from the department 6 weeks after the incident. The termination letter, later obtained through public records requests, cited unlawful detention, use of excessive force during a compliant arrest, and, most damningly, making a false official statement to a dispatcher during the course of duty. His attorney attempted to argue that the termination was excessive, that Duffield had acted on a reasonable belief based on the description provided by dispatch. That argument collapsed almost immediately once the body-worn camera footage was played in the disciplinary hearing, because the footage showed, unambiguously, that Duffield had been told exactly who Angela was and had chosen to proceed with the arrest anyway, and had then lied about that choice to cover himself. Angela Whitfield filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the department and the city 3 months after the incident. The lawsuit, running 41 pages, detailed violations of her Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful seizure, excessive use of force during a compliant detention, and a broader claim of negligent supervision against the department itself, arguing that Duffield's documented pattern of escalatory behavior toward black residents should have triggered intervention long before this incident occurred. The city's legal team reviewed the body-worn camera footage, the cell phone video, the dispatch logs, and Duffield's personnel history, and reached the same conclusion that city attorneys in similar high-profile cases across the country had reached before them. There was no viable defense. The footage showed everything with perfect, time-stamped clarity. Settling quickly became the only rational course of action, both financially and in terms of limiting further reputational damage to a department already under intense public scrutiny. The settlement was finalized 11 months after the incident. The city of Columbus agreed to pay Angela Whitfield $8,200,000, one of the largest civil rights settlements the city had ever paid in a single case involving a wrongful arrest. Angela donated a significant portion of the settlement, choosing to direct funds toward organizations focused on police accountability training and toward a legal defense fund, supporting civilians who had been wrongfully detained but lacked the resources or platform to pursue justice the way she had been able to. "I didn't do this for the money," she told a local reporter in one of her only public statements about the case. "I did this because I have the training, the resources, and the institutional backing to fight back when something like this happens to me. Most people don't have any of that. I want the settlement to go toward changing that reality for someone else. Should every dollar of a settlement like this be required to fund reform, rather than sitting untouched in a city budget? Let me know what you think." The internal investigation into the department didn't stop with Duffield's termination. Once investigators had pulled his personnel history and found the pattern of prior complaints, the Department of Justice opened a broader pattern or practice review into the department's handling of use of force complaints and racial disparities in stop and detention data. That review took 9 months to complete and examined 5 years of departmental records. The findings, released in a lengthy federal report, were sobering. Black residents in the jurisdiction were detained and searched at rates significantly disproportionate to their share of the population, even after controlling for reported crime statistics in the area. Complaints involving allegations of excessive force or racial bias were sustained at a rate far below the national average, suggesting a systemic pattern of internal reviews that consistently gave officers the benefit of the doubt, regardless of the strength of the evidence against them. The department entered into a consent decree with federal oversight attached. The reforms mandated under that decree were extensive: mandatory verification protocols requiring officers to attempt identity confirmation before applying physical restraint whenever a detainee claims law enforcement status, an early intervention system designed to flag officers who accumulated multiple complaints within a defined time window, an independent civilian oversight board granted actual subpoena authority rather than a purely advisory role, mandatory de-escalation retraining for the entire patrol division, and a federally monitored 3-year compliance period with regular public reporting requirements. Ryan Duffield never worked in law enforcement again. His termination for cause, combined with the national media attention surrounding the case, made him effectively unhireable at any other agency in the country. He attempted, according to court filings related to his eventual appeal, to find work in private security, But even those opportunities dried up once background checks turned up his name attached to the incident. His appeal of the termination was denied at every level he pursued it. The federal criminal referral regarding potential charges for deprivation of rights under color of law remained under review by federal prosecutors for over a year before a final charging decision was made public. Angela Whitfield returned to full active duty with the United States Marshal Service almost immediately after the incident, choosing not to take extended leave despite the trauma of the arrest itself. Colleagues who worked alongside her in the years that followed said the experience, rather than diminishing her effectiveness, seemed to sharpen her focus on training younger officers within the agency, on de-escalation, and on the importance of clear, calm communication during high-stress encounters, precisely the skill set that had protected her during those 4 terrifying minutes at the gas pump. In interviews given months later, once the lawsuit had settled and the worst of the media attention had faded, Angela reflected on what had happened to her, with a clarity that surprised many who expected her to express more anger than she did. "What happened to me that night wasn't unique," she said. "It was just documented from multiple angles, with a body camera that couldn't lie even when the officer wearing it tried to. Most people who go through something like this don't have a federal badge in their pocket. They don't have a department with the institutional weight to demand accountability. They don't have a cell phone video from a stranger who happened to be standing nearby. They just have their word against an officer's report, and far too often, their word loses. That's why this case mattered beyond just my own situation," she continued. "It wasn't about proving that I deserved better treatment because of my job title. It was about proving that the systems meant to catch this kind of behavior before it happens again actually have teeth. That a pattern of complaints against an officer can't just sit in a file gathering dust while nothing changes. Somebody has to be willing to push, and I happen to have the tools to push harder than most people ever get the chance to." The gas station security footage and the body-worn camera video from that night are still used today in law enforcement training programs across multiple states, held up as a case study in the catastrophic consequences of assumption-based policing and the critical importance of verification before force. Instructors point to the exact moment Duffield chose not to check Angela's jacket pocket as the single decision point where an ordinary traffic-adjacent stop transformed into a career-ending, multi-million-dollar federal civil rights case. What's your biggest takeaway from everything you just watched unfold? Drop it in the comments below, because I read every single one of them. This story matters for reasons that go far beyond one officer's termination or one city's settlement check. Angela Whitfield had every advantage a person could reasonably hope to have in a moment like this. She had 12 years of federal law enforcement training. She had institutional backing from one of the most respected agencies in the country. She had the composure to avoid escalating a situation that could easily have turned violent if she had reacted with anything less than total control. And she still ended up in handcuffs at a gas pump on her way home from a 14-hour day because an officer decided, in a fraction of a second, that she matched a description vague enough to fit half the women in the county. Think about everyone who goes through a similar moment without any of those advantages. Everyone who gets stopped based on nothing but a thin, hastily relayed description. Everyone who doesn't have a badge to produce, or a department willing to fight on their behalf, or a stranger nearby with a phone already recording. Angela's case ended in accountability because every piece of the puzzle happened to align in her favor. Most cases like this never get that alignment, and that's precisely the gap that reform is supposed to close. Not every wrongful detention ends with a settlement. Not every officer with a documented pattern gets removed before real harm occurs. But this one did. And the reforms that followed, however imperfect, exist because one federal marshal refused to let the story end quietly in a police report nobody outside the department would ever read. Thank you for watching this story all the way through. If this made you think differently about how quickly a routine encounter can spiral and about what accountability actually requires to function, share it with someone who needs to see it. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because we're going to keep bringing you stories like this one, the ones that matter, the ones that show what happens when the system is forced to actually work the way it's supposed to. Drop a comment. Do you think $8.2 million was enough? What would real accountability look like in a case like this? See you in the next one.